Okay, guys, welcome everybody. We have Jonah Rosner, special guest. All of you should know who he is. I'd highly recommend following his Instagram, Rosner Performance, and his website is also that. I'm not going to go into a long and storied introduction because we only have so much time, but he is a sports scientist with incredible knowledge. And what I love about Jonah is he keeps learning. He doesn't stop there. Every week he's learning something new, and he is giving that information to us in really digestible ways. So I've learned a lot from Jonah. I look forward to you guys learning a lot from Jonah, and know as coaches that whatever we have said maybe in the past doesn't hold true. Like science, we find out more and more about the science and how it changes, and maybe there are different things. You know, you think about fueling for one, you know, how that's changed over the years, and that's the same for everything you might hear from Jonah today. So continue to excited to continue to learn from you, Jonah. And we're going to get right. If you want to say a quick hello, and then we're going to get right to it.
I just appreciate the introduction. Hopefully I live up to all that credit you just gave me. But no, thank you all for having me here. I'm excited to talk to you all and know how great the community is you all have built.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonah. So the first one I wanted to ask, because we are in this phase for a lot of you, and I wanted you to talk about the benefit of speed and power work to increase your top end paces. And how being faster at the 1 mile or the 5K and your peak power on the bike, how that translates to you becoming a better endurance athlete.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think as endurance athletes, a lot of us sometimes have difficulty understanding, and myself too, sometimes why getting like my top end speed, my sprint speed, or my max power speed on a bike would translate something over to, for example, a full Ironman or a marathon where I'm clearly running or cycling or whatever the modality is as a much lower intensity. And it's a really good question and a great point. And there's a few things we can think about here. First of all, number one, like I'm sure for a lot of you are interested in cycling, you have something called like a power meter. And in power meters, from those, we get things like a power duration curve, where for very short durations, like a sprint, my power is going to be very high. And for longer duration events, like a triathlon, my average power is going to be much lower. But what we see with these power duration curves are that, for example, my 10-minute power is never going to be able to be faster than my 1-minute power, just to make it very simple. And just like by the laws of physics, and what we see from some of the research now is too that if like my VO2 max pace or a 5-minute power output is going to set a ceiling for some of these more aerobic performances, if someone's 5-minute power, 10-minute power are very close to each other, or even the 1-minute power, then the only way your 10-minute power is ever going to improve is by improving that 1-minute power first. So essentially raises the ceiling on your overall aerobic abilities by increasing those sprint abilities, and then that's going to give you room. So a way I really like to look at this is for like thresholds, VO2 max, or marathon performance is my specialty is this sprint speed is here, your VO2 max speed is here, and then like your race performance work is down here often. But if my race performance and my threshold are already so close to that max power output, I first have to raise my ceiling before I'm physically able to raise like my race specific work. So when we're far away from the race, it can be beneficial to raise that max power output. So then I have plenty of room to move all of my race specific pace up. And from a physiology standpoint, there is a lot of benefits to power and speed work as well too. We could think of like your 1-minute max, all our power training or sprint training and running, almost like a strength training session. It has very similar physiological adaptations. When I'm sprinting, I'm producing a lot of force, or I'm biking as hard as I can. I'm producing a lot of force into the bike. And we have some good research now that training is very similar to strength training, where it activates a large amount of your muscle and it teaches your muscle to get stronger. So what happens is your brain in the future has a better ability to activate that muscle, and it activates that muscle in a more efficient way. Sometimes the muscle might get larger as well, which is going to allow it to produce more force. And these are our physiological adaptations that improve the muscle's efficiency at lower intensities. So if I have a stronger muscle that can produce more force, that means my marathon or my triathlon, my Ironman effort is going to be a lower percentage of my muscle's maximal ability, and that's going to make the muscle more efficient. So those are the few things I like to think about when I think about what the research is showing, why max speed or power training may help us, even in these longer events where I'm not going to be cycling or running or swimming at my all-out max power.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonah. Guys, if you have any questions to follow up on anything he said, then just type it in the comment section. We'll get to that later. So this one is a really great question. You just recently posted it on Instagram. I think you posted it as the Zone 2 myth.
Yeah.
And zone 2, we always say we want to keep our athletes in their aerobic zone, for a lot of their training, but it only applies in
Yeah.
at certain times, and not for newer athletes. So
Yeah.
this is really ears open for those that are newer to the sport. And if those are helping advise some friends, I would say definitely listen up on this one.
Yeah, there's a few points I want to bring up here. I think when we think about what you said is completely true. When we look at pro athletes' training distribution or high level endurance athletes, most of their time is spent in that zone 2 or at lower intensity. And well, why is that? Because a lot of triathletes now, for example, are training 30 hours a week. If I'm training 30 hours a week, I'm sure most of you have had this experience. When you do a very hard session, like a high intensity session, you probably feel kind of worse after that than you would if it was an easy ride. So harder sessions, these higher intensity sessions, when we spend it at higher intensities closer over here to max, they have what we call a higher fatigue cost. They cause more muscle damage. There's a metabolic, you burn through a lot more of your glycogen. They come with more fatigue. So because of that fatigue cost, I can only do such a percentage of my training at those intensities before I risk the risk of injury, or I just can't keep training there because I'm so fatigued and my body physically won't let me. But at the same time, we know training volume is really important to be an elite endurance athlete. There's a reason all of them are running or cycling so much. So training volume leads to very beneficial adaptations like the increase in the amount of mitochondria you have, your ability to utilize fat as fuel, just beneficial adaptations. So we know that we need our volume to be high, but I can only complete a small amount of intensity in a week before I get so much fatigue, where that low intensity training comes with very little fatigue. So if I'm training for a large many hours in a week, like 20, 30 hours in a week, like some of the triathletes are pros, then that easy training becomes much more important because I need the volume. And the only way I can get it is through that easy training because that high intensity training comes with so much fatigue. So that's why they spend so much time at easy training because they need the volume and they just can't do a ton of high intensity. So to fill the gaps, they do a ton of low intensity work. But if I'm only training a few hours a week, I don't want to only do low intensity work because I need to do some higher intensity work. Higher intensity work is going to come with a bigger stimulus, so it's going to lead to bigger adaptations. It's training loads which will cause adaptations. And when we look at actually the research, like high volume training is important for elites, but the thing that matters the most for training and being a great endurance athlete is consistent training over months and years. Endurance adaptations like increase in how large my heart is, the amount of blood it pumps with each beat, mitochondria. So like how much mitochondria you have. Those things come from months and years of training. So the most important thing is consistency. So if you can be consistent, that's what matters. It doesn't really matter how much zone 2 is. You just have to be going easy enough where you can maintain it over time. And especially when you're a new endurance athlete, zone 2 is going to be very hard for you to complete. And the reason that is because zone 2, the way we define it, is you have two thresholds. You have a first lactate threshold and a second lactate threshold. That first lactate threshold is when we see a first baseline rise in lactate in the blood. So it's that first part in exercise when you start burning a little more carbs. It gets a little harder, but you can maintain it. It's like a little bit above that is where you run a marathon. I can still maintain exercise for a long time. And then you have that second lactate threshold, the threshold everyone talks about, where once you cross that line, we say like there's no going back because essentially what happens is you start accumulating more lactate and hydrogen and all these other acidic things in the blood and in the muscle that more than your body can deal with. And it forces you to stop exercising. So you get like that burn. But when I'm first starting training, my thresholds are well defined because thresholds require some adaptation and some training over time. So the thing that's going to make my first threshold a little higher and give me a zone 2 is mitochondria or capillaries, like adaptations that come with training. So what we see from the research and from the testing I've done with a lot of athletes, when someone is very new to running or cycling or any endurance event, they cross those zone 2 right away as soon as they pick up intensity or start even jogging because they just don't have the aerobic development yet to have that zone 2. So as soon as I start exercising, that's a high intensity for me because my body isn't adapted yet. I'll just start accumulating lactate. I'll start burning through some carbs, and that's okay. The most important thing for those new athletes is to stay consistent over time. Maybe they need to walk a little bit, walk, jog, whatever it is. But they're not really going to have a zone 2 because they don't have that aerobic base yet when they're a new athlete. So the zone 2 training becomes much more relevant for athletes who are training at very high volumes throughout the week and they need to do a lot of easy training. If not, they'll get burnt out. And if you're a new athlete, I really wouldn't worry too much about it because you don't have the aerobic base to develop yet to really have a true zone two. And that comes with consistent training over time, no matter if it's a little bit of a higher intensity, low intensity. It's about having some hard days and easy days throughout the week and maintaining it over time and not worrying about the zone two.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonah. So the next question, you recently posted, these super shoes that everyone's wearing. You get about, they're saying, a 4% increase in performance, but you can do that through strengthening your calf, Achilles stiffness, etc. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, this one's a bit of a complicated one. First of all, super shoes are really interesting because everyone's individual. Like some people we see get a really good benefit from super shoes and some people don't. And it depends on the super shoes. Like everyone responds to different super shoes. That's why some of the testing now is really cool. We could show who responds to each. So 4% is just like on average what we see. It's actually pretty high, 4%. Most people are probably closer to 2 to 3% from super shoes. And some people might be what we call no responders, and some may be super responders, more than 4%. But what super shoes essentially do is because of the compliance of the foam and the foam's ability to help you run and the carbon plate combination, it essentially makes your body work less hard. So the foam and the carbon plate essentially push your body forward. They store energy from the ground. And because they store and release energy from the ground, your body doesn't have to create. It allows your muscles to be more efficient. So if the shoes do more work, that means my foot and ankle and calf do less work. There's not as much demand on them to make the force to move me forward. And so what's another way we could potentially do that is if we make the foot, calf, ankle, and Achilles stronger, it theoretically could have a similar effect to super shoes because then they'll be doing a lower percentage of work. It'll be easier for them. And we see from the research that is actually what happens often. Well, there's been some work now that does very specific calf training. And all this is very heavy calf training for short durations. So I'll hold a weight like against like a squat rack or a leg press, extremely heavy, like 90% of the max I could do on one leg, like on my toes. So it stresses my calf for about 4 seconds, rest for 4 seconds, repeat around 3 to 4 rounds of that per leg. And that heavy stimulus is a very potent stimulus to do a few things. It's going to increase how strong my calf is since I'm lifting heavy weight. And tendons, especially your Achilles tendon and tendons in general, love heavy weights. Heavy weights lifted for very heavy with a low volume, and like in this circumstance, cause your tendons to get more stiff. And stiff tendons are a good thing for runners and running economy or how efficient you are, because a stiff tendon, what it doesn't stretch as much when your foot hits the ground. That's all stiffness means. And it's going to return more energy from the ground and do more work. And tendons, the cool thing about tendons is they're very efficient. We'll just say tendons are much more efficient at producing force than my calf muscle. So if I increase the stiffness of my tendon, the Achilles, and I increase my calf strength, well, we see what happens in the research is when you start running, your calf operates very efficiently. So your calf needs less energy to create the force needed to move you forward in running. And that's the goal of distance running or endurance sports in general. If I can move myself forward at the same speed for less energy, I'm more efficient. And the most efficient athletes will always be the best in endurance sports. So long story short, this heavy weightlifting of the calf area allows my calf, because my Achilles gets more stiff and my calf gets stronger, my calf will be more efficient, it will consume less energy, and that reduction in energetic cost is around 4%, which is similar to super shoes. So my recommendations would be to do both. Do some heavy strength work in the weight room with calf training, and I could send Natasha some of these movements after because it's easier to see with videos. And also maybe super shoes that work for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonah. Okay, moving on. Your advice on rotating shoes and the science behind the reduction in injuries when this rotation.
This one's very interesting. It's probably similar to like, why don't I do a high intensity speed work every day in running? Or why don't I do the same exact movement every day in the gym? When you do the same thing over and over again, it puts the same stress on the same tissues. So we see now, like you probably have pairs of shoes you like, some you don't like. Some shoes I put on, I feel more in my calf. Some I feel more in my upper leg. And we have good research now that based on the shoe you wear, it's going to change your biomechanics slightly. So some shoes might load my calf more. Some shoes might load my hamstrings and upper legs more. But the main point here is if I wear the same shoe every day, then the same muscles and tissues are stressed every day. And we know a really good way to create overuse injuries, potentially, is to stress the same muscle or tissue in the same way every day. So by rotating shoes throughout the week, it's almost like, oh, I'm giving that muscle or tissue a little break. On Monday, I'm wearing these shoes, which stress my calves a lot. Now my calves that are getting that stress, which could be good to make them stronger, but I don't want that every day. So the next day I wear a different pair of shoes on Tuesday that stresses the upper leg. And then my calves get a little bit of a break. And then by rotating shoes in this manner throughout the week, what's happening is each day I'm stressing different muscles, or the same shoes are stressing different muscles, but there's space in between when those muscles are stressed. So they get the ability to be stressed, adapt, and then recover. So not the same tissues are being stressed every day. It's kind of like cross training for your legs, I would say. Well, each day we're kind of training them slightly differently so they don't get overused with the shoe rotations.
Very good. Okay. So moving on, we have, it's in line with probably the answer on the 4% and the calf and tendon stiffness, but the benefits of plyos. You just did a post on how plyometrics reduce the risk of bone injury when you are increasing your run volumes. Can you speak to that? Because we do plyos on our schedule every week, but most people are likely to miss their plyos. So
the plyos are the ones we always skip, and plyos are definitely a little different than strength training in typical resistance training, which you could probably tell because it doesn't feel the same as when I lift a very heavy weight. It's different. And plyos have very specific adaptations that come with them. A few performance related, a few probably health related. If we start with the performance related, plyos teach our muscles can get larger, but our muscles also get signals from our brain. And plyos are really good at teaching the signal from our brain to be very efficient. So we improve what we call muscle coordination. So all that means is your muscles get more explosive, and specifically when I'm running or jumping, they get better at the way they're activated by the brain. The brain will be able to set a signal faster to that muscle, and the muscle will become more efficient again. So you consume less energy, which is what you want. But when we look at bone tissue, bone adapts to a slightly different stimulus than muscles, just like tendons may be different than muscles. And the type of stimulus that bones really like is extremely high intensity stimuluses for very short durations. So if you think about running, that's a very long duration cyclic stimulus. I may run for an hour. My bone doesn't like that. It's actually not too much of a load with each step because it's a sub-maximal run, an easy run, and it's too long. A bone doesn't really want to be stressed than more than like 30 to 40 seconds, we say. So what bones like are very high intensity forces applied quickly for short duration. So a plyo jump is much higher intensity than a sub-maximal easy run. There's no reason you can only do like 3 or 4 jumps as hard as possible before you get tired. That puts a very specific stress on the bone. That specific stress on the bone, that shorter duration, high intensity stress, places what we call strain on the bone, and that what causes your bones to come back bigger and increase their size. And a bigger bone, higher bone mineral density, is actually what's going to potentially decrease the risk of a bone injury. So when we think about the benefits of plyos, it's going to make you a better runner because it's going to make you more efficient the way your muscle is activated by your brain. And it's also going to increase your bone size and density because of that very specific stimulus that comes with that, which your bones like, and that's going to protect them. And the best time to do plyos, I saw the question, would be at the beginning of the session when I'm fresh. So like if I have a lift, I would probably do plyos first at the beginning because plyos we want, not after long runs. Exactly. Good point, Harold. So if you have like a lift, whenever you guys schedule a lift, I want to do lifts right after long runs. I want to do lifts like right after a very high intensity track or high intensity bike session. I would just want to have some space. Like if I have a high intensity session in the morning, probably wait 6 to 8 hours before I do my lift. And in regards to placements in the lift, I let you do plyos first because plyos are a type of movement where we're working on your explosiveness. And with explosive movements, we want to be as fresh as possible. So we just don't want to do it at the end of the lift where I may have some fatigue from the other part of the lift.
Perfect. Yeah, and on that note, can you speak to strength training? You know, it's one of those things that we provide our athletes weekly, but it's also the last thing. It's the first thing that they're like, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'd rather do my endurance training, but it comes with so much benefit. So I'd love to hear from you the benefit of the heavy lifting specifically, which all our athletes do once a week.
Yeah. I mean, so there's a lot of benefits to heavy lifting, especially for our athletes. We know that heavy lifting from an upper body standpoint for swimming can have a lot of potential beneficial adaptations. Again, similar. If I have a stronger upper body, swimming is going to be more submaximal. My specialty is probably more in the cycling and running space, so I won't speak too much to swimming. But there is also research in cycling and running that what heavy lifting does, there's a few adaptations that you get from heavy lifting that's going to improve what we call your running economy and your cycling economy, or your efficiency. So the same idea, I can cycle at the same power or run at the same speed for less energy, and that's going to make me more efficient. So when I lift heavy, what happens is it makes my muscles stronger, and it's going to do a better job of that than easy or like sub-maximal or distance running or distance cycling. We have some good research now that like heavy torque training cycling is probably going to be similar for short durations. So it's another thing to think about. But anyway, what happens with heavy lifting, my muscle gets stronger through two ways. My brain can activate more of that muscle in a more efficient way, and it can also potentially make the muscle larger, which potentially can make it stronger. But if we just focus on increasing our strength, what happens is if a muscle is stronger, it can move me forward, as we talked about before, a cycle at the same power for a more efficient cost. So now, because each muscle is fiber is larger, stronger, whatever, a smaller percentage of the muscle, or I can complete the same amount of work by activating less muscle because it's now more submaximal for me. Activating less muscle is going to cause me to consume less energy of that muscle. So again, I become more efficient. A stronger muscle, to simplify it, will be a more efficient muscle when I'm cycling or running. And the best way to get a stronger muscle is through heavier lifting. And then there's other adaptations that are specifically going to improve running that we get from heavy lifting or plyometrics, and that's the increase in tendon stiffness. We know stiffer tendons are going to make you run more efficiently because they do more work and they're more efficient than muscles. And we also know that increasing the bone mineral density is going to protect you from a health standpoint. So strength training is a very potent stimulus because it's going to increase your tendon stiffness. It's going to make your muscles more efficient when you run or cycle too, and it's going to help protect your bones.
Great, thank you. We're going to pivot a little bit to nutrition.
Yeah.
And I would love you to speak to the difference between glucose and fructose, as far as muscle glycogen and liver glycogen, and the importance of your morning meal, knowing what is going into that to fuel you correctly.
It's a great question. This is very dependent on how much fueling you're doing, is what I will say, and probably the session. So if we start with the morning meal, so you have like you probably all have heard about the importance of carbohydrates, like eating carbs before hard sessions, the day before an important event. And what we see is you have two main places your body stores carbohydrates after I eat them. My carbohydrates are going to be stored in the muscle, which is your biggest source of carbohydrates. That's going to be your first energy source during endurance training in general. Even low intensity, your body's going to use some of that glycogen. So the glycogen in the muscle, which is the biggest pool of energy and carbohydrates in your body, is going to be your main energy source during endurance events. And we fill those up through carbohydrates in general. Eating carbs will cause insulin to be released, all that stuff, and I'll fill that up. But then you also have a smaller store of carbohydrates in your liver. And the liver carbohydrates, what they do is the liver releases those carbs into your blood during exercise, and it just in your blood in general, hepatic liver output. And those carbohydrates are used as an energy source for your brain, which is important during exercise, but also an extra energy source for your muscle potentially. But the really cool thing is that there's two different types of carbohydrates we eat. We eat like glucose, which is like the typical carb you get from things like rice, white bread, bagels, all the typical carbs, oatmeal you think about. But then you have fructose. And fructose carbs are what it sounds like. They mostly come from fruits, but they also come from things like fruit juices. Like when you guys have a raw drink mix, there's fructose in there for a reason. And the reason you want some fructose in your diet, especially in the morning, is fructose is going to be better at filling up your liver glycogen. And what we talked about, that liver glycogen is really important to maintain your blood glucose and give your brain and your muscles extra energy during very long, hard rides or long, hard runs. And overnight, your muscle glycogen, like if I do a carb load the day before an event, that will fill my muscles with carbs, which would be good, my muscle glycogen. And it won't really get used overnight because my muscles are too active when I'm sleeping. But your liver provides energy to your brain and your other organs, so that carbs can get used overnight. So because those carbs might get used overnight, the morning before a race or a key hard training session, I want to have some fructose through like apple juice, orange juice, or raw drink mix, or like any other sources of fructose, honey, jam. And that's going to fill my liver glycogen. So then my liver glycogen will be full leading into that race or that event. and it could provide my brain and my muscles with extra energy, which is important. And it's very similar to why you might see some gels now with fructose in it. Actually, it's not too similar, but you also see gels now and like energy drink mixes with fructose in it for the in-race fueling. And that's because when you start fueling with higher carbohydrates, like if some of you are going above 60 grams per hour on a bike, for example, we see that we want a combination of different types of carbs, glucose and fructose in your gel or drink mix. Because what that does is you have separate transporters in your body for glucose versus fructose, and it allows you to take on more carbs per hour and use those carbs. So like we typically think, which we know now probably isn't exactly the case, that glucose carbs can be tapped out at 60 grams per hour, but it probably depends on your body size, training, your ability to absorb. So maybe anywhere from 40 to 70, depending on the individual. But once those are tapped out, if I take in fructose carbs, I can actually go to higher, like closer to 90 maybe. And for some individuals, higher than 90 grams per hour. So that's why we want fructose for the morning meal to replace that liver glycogen, and also before in a run or in a key event, because it's going to let you take on more carbs per hour. More carbs per hour will let you have more energy and perform better.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonah. Jonah, I'm mindful of the time. It's 6:27. So I'm going to say thank you for.
Yeah, if anyone has, we could probably answer one or two more if there's any specific questions that anyone has.
Yeah, does anyone have a question? If you want to type it in the chat. That was all my 7 questions I had prepared for today.
Wow, that was perfect timing. You nailed that. Also put in the chat then here where people can find me, just in case, like just message me on Instagram. I'm getting a lot better about that now. And also I'll put so you guys can all find me there in case you need to. And then also, like most of this information, I definitely go into much more detail in my newsletter, and I have like free guides and stuff in there. So I'll put a link for that too, which is probably actually, and my email's on that. Let me make sure that works. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely follow the Marathon Science newsletter. I get that every week. It's full of helpful information. We did have one quick question come through. Let me check.
The electrolytes, as someone who works with a lot of supplement companies, like I'll admit this too, like electrolytes are a much trickier science than people realize. Like sugar with the electrolyte, like it's going to help the electrolytes get into the cells. We know that. How much it matters really depends on the duration of the event and the environmental conditions and your sweat rate. I would say during an event, I would always take some with some sugar in it because it's going to help. Outside of that, it might probably just going to make minuscule differences, but it can't hurt. Sugar can only help because it's going to help the electrolytes get inside your cells. So it definitely can't hurt. Like if you have the option, you should probably go with one with a little sugar in it.
Perfect. Okay. That's great. Well, Jonah, we appreciate your time. All the athletes everyone that joined us, we appreciate it. Do know that we have a continual lineup coming up. Next week, we have Dr. Matt Smith, who is a well-known PT out of California. He works with a lot of Olympians. So if you have any specific questions, we should put it in the Front Pack app ahead of time if you're maybe dealing with an injury, and he can address it on the call, which will be helpful for everyone else. And then we have a lineup of some pros coming on here as well. You can learn about their training routine and mindset. So I appreciate you guys hopping on.
Thank you for the opportunity, Natasha. Thank you all for having me. If I can help any of you in any way, please, Mance did well today. That was good. Do I think increased carb intake played a role? No, because I actually talked to Connor. I know what he was doing. He didn't really take it any fuel to that race. And it's because Connor runs a half marathon in less than 60 minutes. The carbs aren't really going to help him. If I run a half marathon that quickly, he had some sodium bicarbonate, some other stuff I'm probably not supposed to say. But it was funny. But yeah, if I can help any of you in any way, feel free to message me, email me, Instagram. You guys have an unbelievable community. I can't say enough good things about Natasha. She's definitely one of the best coaches I've ever worked with, if my opinion matters. So please let me know if I can help you all in any way. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonah. Bye, everybody. See ya.